Welcome to Slow Night, Ancient Tales. Tonight, we journey back in time with a classic piece of Korean literature, Aimlessly, written by Lee Hyo-seok. Set against the backdrop of a turbulent era, this is a story of Juria, a young woman navigating confusion, heartache, and ultimately finding the quiet strength to move forward. As we turn the pages of the past, I invite you to let go of the day's heavy thoughts. Close your eyes, breathe softly, and let this ancient tale guide you into a peaceful slumber. Here's the direct English translation of the text, without any summary or interpretation. Juria, author Lee Hyo-seok. Aimlessly. Waking from a brief stupor, Juria closed her eyes again the moment she found Juhwa sitting and watching over her. It was to organize the various thoughts welling up about him and to muster some solid courage. Just like the first moment she fell into the stupor, her heart was still fluttering and her head felt dizzy. "Have you come to your senses? What on earth happened? Falling into a stupor so suddenly." Juwa's soft voice sounded as if she hadn't heard it in a very long time. Facing Juwa, whom she had been afraid and hesitant to meet, so directly in an instant made her narrow-minded heart suddenly relax, and she felt a reassuring sense of relief at his familiar voice. "But more than anything, it is a relief that you are safe, Juria." Embarrassed that he was taking his hand off her head, moistening a towel with fresh water, placing it on her forehead, and looking at her face anew, Juria closed her opened eyes again. "When did you come up?" "I gladly rushed up last night because things in the countryside were somewhat sorted out, but now things here have gone wrong. Mr. Park, Namjik's folks, Minho, everyone has been swept up." Realizing that Juwa knew about Minho being taken in even before she did, Juria suddenly felt terrified. If he even knew that Minho had been taken in, then perhaps he already knew about that too. About everything. "I was worried that you, Juria, might have been swept up with them. What a relief this is. I heard this place is by no means a safe zone either. We don't know when a sudden storm might sweep in," Juwa continued, briefly lifting the towel from her forehead and checking her complexion. "If you are feeling well enough, you should flee this house as soon as possible." "Oh, has it become that urgent?" Hearing that another huge, new incident was looming before her eyes while her matters of the heart were still unresolved, Juria realized her mind was completely bewildered. "If you feel up to it, gather your senses and get up. I will roughly sort out what needs to be sorted in the meantime," Juwa said, suddenly leaving Juria's side in a hurry and going to the desk. He pulled books from the bookshelf and scoured between the pages, and pulled out the desk drawers to rummage through every layer of letters and papers. While watching his hurried movements, Juria's heart also began to flutter impatiently, as if being fanned. This was the perfect opportunity to quickly confess her fault. "Look here." However, after shutting her eyes tight and uttering this single phrase, sensing that Juwa would look at her anew, Juria couldn't continue speaking and pulled the blanket completely over herself. "Are you saying you can't get up?" When Juwa came, pulled back the blanket, and looked down at her, she had no choice but to awkwardly say something entirely different. "I feel too uncomfortable to get up. Please, hurry and flee by yourself. I will just face what comes lying here. A guilty body ought to be punished." Juria meant the last remark to have a hidden meaning, but Juwa, failing to catch the irony, instead thought Juria's desperate, giving-up attitude was dangerous and tried hard to help her up. "Stop talking nonsense and hurry up and gather your strength. If you really have no energy, I will call a car." "What do you mean, a car?" Juwa's words were so grateful that she raised her upper body, feeling apologetic. "Then I'll get up. Even if I get up, there is something you must hear before we flee." "What time do you think it is to be speaking so leisurely? There is a time for talking, but in this urgent situation." Rather a bit angry, Juwa went back to the desk and continued hastily organizing. Realizing she had lost the chance to speak again, Juria kicked off her bedding and sprang up in a rush of anxiety. Depending on how you think about it, a problem even more crucial than fleeing is lying right before our eyes. When a sudden rustling sound was heard from outside, barely listening to Juria's words, Juwa crouched down for a moment, gathered the documents, and quietly slipped out the back door. Nothing came. As the briefly tangled tension relaxed, Juria also stood up and swiftly changed her clothes. It seemed Juwa was burning the documents he had taken out to the kitchen. After rustling around for a while, he turned back, entered the room, and rummaged through the closet. While Juria was changing clothes and fixing her face, Juwa turned back again and entered the opposite room. "If I confess the sin I committed, won't you be surprised? Won't you be distressed? No matter what sin I have committed, will you take me with you?" Sin, yes, that's right. I at least consider it a great sin so far. The words were ordinary, but for Juria, it was mustering all the courage she had. "No, what incomprehensible things are you saying? Stop with the useless talk and let's go out quickly. For some reason, I feel an unbearable sense that a great danger is approaching closer with every passing second." "My confession, that might be the great danger." "Ah, I'm trembling for some reason." In fact, trembling inexplicably, Juwa roughly sorted through the other documents on the desk that he hadn't yet touched and divided them between his two hands. "Now, let's go straight out this way. Follow right behind me," he said, and this time, without hesitation, he opened the front door. "Wait just a moment. Please wait for just 1 minute. I will feel relieved only if I say what needs to be said." While Juria was shouting anxiously, Juwa, who had already gone out the door, suddenly recoiled and cried out for some reason. "Ah!" The next moment, he hurriedly dashed into the kitchen. Thinking he intended to finish burning the documents in his hands, Juria flung the door open and was startled herself. Outside, before she knew it, exactly as Juwa had intuited, what was bound to come had arrived and stood there. A few minutes later, Juwa and Juria, without the slightest resistance, obediently stood before the officers of the jurisdictional station. When Juria felt that waiting every passing second for the danger, even while knowing it would come, was all her own fault, her heart ached thinking about Juwa's well-being. Furthermore, since it was her first time walking side by side as a man and a woman down the darkening streets under the surveillance of strangers was so embarrassing that Juria couldn't lift her head the entire time. 3 days overlapped twice, and then 3 times. After 10 days, Juria alone was released from the station. However, she could well guess that it was only because her direct involvement in the case was slight and her crime was light, whereas the day Juhua and the others would be released was as distant as the sea, and depending on the circumstances, they might have to spend many years there. When she came out onto the street in a ragged state, with her coat strings torn to shreds and the width of her clothes ripped apart, Juria, for whom everything was a first experience, felt that the sudden changes of those few days were unbearably long and harsh, like years of hardship. It was literally the agony of hell. She realized that the reality of the movement was something grueling, far removed from what she had previously thought with her rash and excited mind. At the same time, when she understood that steadily maintaining passion for that path was not something an ordinary person could do, she felt anew that the fierce will of people like Juhua, who never collapsed despite enduring such agony repeatedly, was as high and magnificent as the sun above the sky. Insult, a treatment beneath human dignity that was difficult to express with such a polite word. Amidst that, aside from her spirit, Juria's body was completely exhausted and withered. What was even more agonizing on top of that was a sudden, massive physiological change she experienced for the first time. Not many days after she went in, for reasons different from physical pain, her appetite suddenly decreased, she felt nauseous, and she occasionally started having stomach aches. These symptoms worsened as the days went by. More than the torment she received in the interrogation room, this physiological torment that came while crouching in the dark cage was even harder for her to bear. On the day she was released from the doors of the station, suddenly these symptoms seemed to worsen. Trying to walk the bright streets after a long time, her head reeled, she felt dizzy, and her stomach slowly turned over. While walking the wide street, she stopped several times, dry-heaved for a while, and then walked again. Exhausted by this agony she was experiencing for the first time in her life, she didn't even have the luxury to care about the gazes of the passers-by. Anxious about the unusual physical changes, without even having the time to drop by her house, she went straight to look for Hala. At Hala's recommendation, she took the opportunity to visit a small gynecology clinic in a back alley. "There is nothing for you to worry about." The doctor, who had finished a routine examination by checking her pulse and using a stethoscope, spoke calmly, as if smiling at Juria's overly anxious expression. "Hasn't some major change occurred?" "A major change is indeed a major change." The doctor answered nonchalantly and continued speaking with a gentle smile, as if finding the attitude of the naive Juria, who was still inexperienced in life, cute. "It seems it has already been 3 or 4 months since your joyous event." "Excuse me?" The immature Juria, still not knowing the meaning of the doctor's words, widened her eyes in a fluster, surprised by his incomprehensible verdict. "What joyous event? Try to guess." Noticing the doctor's gaze subtly staring at her stomach as he spoke, Juria finally realized his meaning and, suddenly shocked, unconsciously hugged her stomach. "No, then." Her earlobe suddenly turning bright red. This time Juria couldn't help but be genuinely shocked by the doctor's verdict, having finally understood it. "But there is absolutely nothing to worry about. In about a month, those symptoms will disappear again, and you will return to a peaceful state." Leaving the clinic hurriedly as if being chased, Juria's burning face did not cool down easily even as she walked against the cold street wind. Because so many incidents had struck all at once, she could not compose her chaotic mind. Yet, amid the confusion, excitement, and shame, Juria secretly counted 3 months back on her fingers, replaying the memory of her passion with Juwa from 3 months ago in her mind. Of course, the dates could not have been wrong. However, the more certainty she gained about the dates, the more ashamed she felt, wondering whether it was true or a lie. That immense life change felt entirely like a lie. Returning home, Juria took to the bed in her lonely room from that day on. This was because the fatigue from the many days she spent at the station surged up all at once, on top of the physical changes that became even more severe. She constantly felt nauseous, had to dry heave, and felt dizzy. She felt so intensely chilly that it was as if she had contracted a major illness. Lying down, covered in a blanket, her heart involuntarily weakened, and even groans slipped out without her realizing it. Thoughts of her hometown, which she had forgotten for a long time, suddenly seeped into her heart. She even shed tears for no reason. The worry of what she would do if her illness grew worse, with no one to care for her, made her suffering body suffer even more. However, when she stayed up through the night and the day passed, the symptoms would lighten, and her body would feel much lighter. When the agony of the illness lightened, this time the agony of her mind suddenly deepened. A kind of fear arising from experiencing a massive life change and the sense of shame accompanying her particular situation. These two heavy emotions pressed down on her heart like scale weights. Moreover, an inexplicable sense of shame weighed down her mind. At the thought that a frivolous and inexperienced person like her was already becoming a mother, the final step of a woman, she blushed alone and patted her stomach in an anxious state of mind. In the end, that's the only way. After thinking and agonizing for days, she finally arrived at the last resort. After considering every angle and hesitating, she waited for the night to darken and visited a nearby pharmacy. Hiding a yellow oil bottle in the folds of her skirt, she quickly left the store, feeling awkward. That night, suppressing the feeling that she was committing a great sin, she gulped down a small bowlful of castor oil in one breath. She had predicted it, but the throat pain was severe, as if scraping down her intestines. It was simple knowledge easily gleaned from magazines back in her school days, so she hadn't believed from the start that it would be foolproof. But seeing how severe the stomachache was, she regretted her rash action again. After crawling around the floor with severely tightening and surging stomach pains, intense diarrhea followed. It felt as if her insides had been completely flushed out. After enduring several intensely agonizing nights, her whole body became languid and exhausted, and she didn't have the courage to continue that method. Of course, one attempt could not possibly have an effect, and her physiological condition was the same as before she drank it. But she didn't want to lay a hand on it any further. The infinite torment of those few days felt like a punishment, scolding her for her rash behavior. The feeling of shame about motherhood was nothing but an insignificant, unnecessary luxury of the mind compared to that agony. She realized through her own body that rebelling against nature was nothing more than a futile, impermissible effort. Besides these thoughts, she suddenly thought of Juwa. Without being able to confess to him about the day of his return, she had been robbed of him. The day of his return is far away. The relic of love he left behind, isn't this the only gift bestowed upon Juriya? Eliminating even that legacy of love would be akin to willingly severing her ties with Juwa on her own. Her earnest feelings towards the beloved Juwa, which still lingered, wouldn't allow it. Juriya thought that carefully protecting and raising this long-awaited relic would serve as compensation for the faults she had committed and as an expression of her unchanging love for Juwa. Let's not have other thoughts and just accept what comes as it comes. In just a few days, Juriya finally firmly realized this conclusion in her heart. She repented for how utterly meaningless the foolish thoughts and rash actions she harbored until just days ago had been. With this new mindset, her heart felt joyful and pleasant, as if a new life had opened up. The future opened up brightly, and the path she was to tread was clearly visible. Along with her bright thoughts, her physical agony gradually lessened. Just over a week after she took to her bed, she was able to rise with a refreshed mind and body. The house, neglected for a long time, was deeply messy. The bookshelves, desk, and closet were in the exact disarray as when they were arrested. Moving about, she roughly tidied the house for half a day. Thinking it was her final cleanup, a deep sense of emotion quietly welled up. Leaving most things as they were, she separately gathered and stacked the books, clothing, and daily necessities that were directly needed and important in a visible place. She also carefully took down Rosa's portrait from the wall above the book shelf and slipped it into a bookmark she had set aside. Later, a savings bank book turned up inside the desk drawer. It was the postal bank book where she had deposited the roughly 300 won she brought when she first came to Seoul. For the sake of testing, she looked over the bank book. The deposit column had only a single line of entered amount, and the remaining boxes were like an empty barn, like a factory without workers, while the withdrawal column below was fully packed with numbers down to the last page without a single blank line. The numbers of meager amounts, resembling a swarm of countless mosquitoes gathered black upon a chunk of flesh, sucking its blood, had sucked all the blood from the deposit column and then died and collapsed right there in their place. Or could one call those countless lifeless numbers the trash of consumption piled up in the yard of a factory with no production? For fun, she quietly calculated those many numbers. It wasn't that she was hoping there would be some balance left, but there was absolutely zero to spare. If she miscalculated even slightly, the sum of the bottom column would far exceed the deposit amount. Not even enough for a cup of tea, Juriya muttered and chuckled. The meaningless bank book, which had become the skeleton of her past life, was ripped to shreds between her fingers. Each strip of falling numbers, ripped line by line, became a line of the history of Juriya's life over the past half year, flashing past her eyes. After tearing it all up, she cast a fresh glance at the desk. But hadn't the piggy bank that was always sitting there been broken a long time ago too? However, Juriya was no longer sad about anything. As if it were natural, as if it were fitting that this day had come, she calmly shifted her gaze away, grabbed the pile of bankbook scraps on her lap with both hands, and stood up. Playfully, she tossed what was in her grasp into the air. Countless pieces, countless numbers fluttering abundantly through the room like falling blossoms. Those were precisely the fragments of Juriya's own past life, now being liquidated. Let what will pass, pass, and let what will come, come. Juriya was slightly excited without even realizing it, enough to mutter this anew while looking at the fallen blossoms that had completely dropped. However, when she went straight from there to find Hala and arrived at Arirang, her excitement vanished, and she was able to recover a calm mind again. After thanking Hala for the kindness of coming to nurse her a couple of times while she was sick, Juriya switched to a grounded tone she had never used before. This will probably be my last discussion with you, sis. What is this about, acting so anew? It's a matter of my personal course of action, so of course it's a huge issue for me. Following up quickly, Juria added, even if I stay alone after everyone has been taken in, there is nothing I can do, so I was thinking of going down to the countryside for a while. You've thought well. It was such a sad reply, given without even a moment to think or judge, that Juria looked straight at Hala. However, she knew that Hala's voice was overflowing with sincerity and affection. What good is there in staying here with nothing to do? Moreover, with a heavy body. I need to take care of my body, so braving the shameful thoughts, I must go down and stay there for a short while anyway. If your family accepts it, it's the best course. With their soft parents' hearts, there is no way they wouldn't accept it. But my only worry is looking after the one who was taken in. Don't worry about things here. Won't I look after them as much as my hands can reach? If you'd do that, how grateful I would be. Then I will trust only you, sis, with things here. Don't speak at length about that matter alone. Cutting off the end of the conversation, Hala changed her tone. Since you're here anyway, let's have dinner together, with me here tonight. She said this, stood up, walked around the shop gathering things, and started preparing dinner. Juria also went out and helped her. Saying it was the last dinner, Hala put in more effort than usual, buying and stir-frying roast meat, and pouring wine into large glass cups. While they talked at length, the night deepened. Having received her friend's agreement and encouragement on her plan, Juria's path ahead looked straight and clear, so she naturally felt relieved and talked often. Eventually, feeling it too bothersome to return home, she decided to just sleep right there late into the night. Waking up together with Hala the next morning, Juria took Hala's trip to Sodaemun as a good opportunity and volunteered to accompany her. Although she had always felt the need and curiosity, visiting Hyeonjo-dong was a first for her. When she got off the bus heading to Yeongcheon, following Hala, who was holding a bundle of clothes to drop off for inmates, her heart fluttered inexplicably. The sight of the drop-off center, the Muokjai Pass visible in the distance, the long brick wall, the massive iron gate, all these scenes, seen for the first time, were deeply impressive to Juria. Pretending that she had come to drop off books for a friend, she coincidentally received permission to enter. Following close behind Hala, she passed through the courtyard, the office, the drop-off handling room, and the storage department one after another, and later entered the waiting room. It was nothing special, just as if she had come on a field trip following a teacher. With as calm a mind as possible, she closely observed the figures of the people milling around inside the waiting room. Though it was merely a world separated by a single brick wall, the air inside was as completely different from that of the outside world as flipping a palm. Every face showed a restless, dark complexion, and the atmosphere inside the waiting room created by this was uniformly gloomy. A woman who had even brought her newborn baby on her back, only to be denied visitation, burst out crying aloud right there, without even the peace of mind to care about being in front of everyone's eyes. Unable to bear watching steadily, Juria took that as an opportunity, stood up from her seat, and went outside. When Hala finished her visitation and retrieved the dropped-off items, it was well past noon. When they came out of the iron gate again, the shadow of the brick wall had fallen long upon the ground. A cool breeze occasionally blew down from Muokjai Pass. Juwa will end up living inside there in the future. While striving to shake off unnecessary sentiment, Juria looked over the wall once more without realizing it. Rejoicing that she had taken a field trip to a good place on her final day leaving Seoul, Juria got on the bus again. Although she had spent her half-year since coming to Seoul aimlessly and achieving nothing, she thought deeply on the bus that, at the very least, seeing and coming to know various atmospheres was a kind of preliminary education for her future. After returning home, Juria packed her belongings into a bag one by one. Her luggage was extremely simple. Was the fact that what was once a basket when she came up to Seoul had now turned into a large travel bag evidence, if any, that her life had become a bit more complicated? The books and clothes she had set aside still filled the bag snugly. She intended to leave all the remaining luggage, household goods, and bowls entirely in Hala's hands. Leaving things roughly as they were, with the thought of asking Hala to clean up the rest, She just locked the front gate, picked up her bag, and went to Hala's again. Guessing the inside of Juria's empty pockets, Hala had already bought a train ticket for her. Lastly, she treated her to strong coffee. That day, too, Hala left the shop's work to someone else and entirely kept Juria company. Entrusting everything to her twice, 3 times over, Juria threw her body onto the late-night last train. Even amidst her calmness, her heart felt a slight flutter. When the departure bell rang and the voices of those seeing others off and those leaving flew chaotically above the platform, Juria also stuck her head out the window and, with a fluttering heart, tossed confused and dizzy words of farewell toward Hala and the platform. Farewell, soul. It's a short parting, not a permanent goodbye. Next time I come up, I will have become a proper person. Farewell, Hala. When my body becomes robust, I will come up again. Please look after things here well, right often. As Juria leaves the chaotic streets of the city behind and boards the train toward a new beginning, our story for tonight comes to a close. Just as she learned to let the past fade like falling blossoms, may you also release any worries holding you back. You have done enough for today. Let the deep quiet of this slow night embrace you and drift into a calm, restorative sleep. Good night and sweet dreams.